by the hand of death!
Hey, this is Dan Green, and welcome back to another By the Hand of Dan. Today, we're doing the Dark Magician. Some of you may have seen a Dark Magician image I made several months ago, and it's available at my table when I make appearances. But this is the revision of the Magician, the darker Dark Magician, which I think is oh so cool. Sometimes I like getting back to basics, opening up a real drawing pad using a pencil, an eraser, and this video is playing back at double the speed, just so you know I don't really draw that fast. I'm using a model off camera as a reference, as a starting point. I love these Fison figures that you can get for a little under $100, but they're so realistic, and they're naturalistic in their poses. They have a metal underskeleton and a rubber exterior, kind of like a Terminator.
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over metal endoskeleton.
They have various body types, both male and female, and they're about 12 inches tall. They're made for people who customize quote-unquote action figures at 1/6 scale. This is relative to Hot Toys, and only a few of you may understand what that means, but they make wonderful, wonderful models for drawing reference as well, and Fison is spelled P-H-I-C-E-N. Look it up if you're interested. Drawing from a physical model in front of you is a bit different than drawing from a photo. When you take a picture, a lot of decisions are made by the camera. When you're looking at real life, you're also interpreting what it is that you're seeing in different ways, and I try to do something like that at least a few times a week, where the references I'm using are real-life illustrations. I also like to mix things up, so sometimes I'm starting from my imagination and putting a body pose down on the page and building it up from there. But today, I was interested in going again back to some basics, doing some old-fashioned art drills with old-fashioned art materials. And not only is there a fun kind of nostalgia to it, but there's a physicality about it that you obviously don't get in digital, certainly not in the same way. And don't get me wrong, I love digital. It enables me to do so much more that I wouldn't be able to do using a traditional media approach. But I don't want to get into the habit of using digital so much that I'm leaning on all of the crutches that it makes available and not developing my more basic rendering skills, or at least keeping them somewhat in shape. And it is embarrassing when using a sketch pad, when I just reflexively try to backstep instead of erase, or I try to zoom into the image, like, why isn't my paper enlarging? I don't get it. So this stage is partly finding the right pose, but it's also kind of a warm-up. I know I want this version of the Dark Magician to be in a somewhat dynamic pose. I also want the pose to be revealing of the new design, the cool silver outlining and trim work that is a part of that darker Dark Magician look. So I don't want the character to look like a mannequin showing off their clothes, and I want it to feel like we're seeing this character in the midst of a dynamic and dramatic situation. This actually is going to be part of a larger composition, and I will do 2 other characters in this composition and a 4th character to bring it all together. I've mentioned to a few fans a few times at different appearances the concept I have for this image, but I'm not going to get into it fully here. Though, if you know what it is, if you're one of those fans who thinks they know what it is, please comment below. Okay, so I'm finishing up the basic outline, doing a little more structuring work here and there, understanding how those masses are working together, where they are relative to the viewer, that sort of a thing. And after I clarify a few more things for myself, I will simply take a picture of this image and import that into a program called Procreate, which I use on the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil. And that's where the details can be enhanced. I'm doing a little digital inking here, but then I'm going to skip ahead because I changed the positioning of this image quite a bit and addressed most of the anatomy. There we go. And now I'm bringing it to the stage of the details of the uniform, the outfit, the wonderful line work that Sensei Takahashi brought to this redesign, which is really just, I was going to say enchanting, but I was like, oh wait, that's such a bad pun. But it's great. You see, I'm also using some other references, mainly though I'm basing it off of the card that illustration first appeared on. And I love that book that has this blown up large. And it's a little bit more menacing. I also think it's a little bit more, I don't know if sexy is the right word, but it has an element of that. It feels a little more mature. And I love that Kazuki Takahashi's work goes there. It's surely meant for a younger audience to a degree, but there's an edge to it, which is something I hear a lot from people who describe their experience of first having Pokemon as their favorite show, but then being captivated by an element that Yu-Gi-Oh had. You know, it's not for as young an audience, and there's something cool about that. As you can see, there are a lot of lines and a repetition of certain shapes. The upper shoulder pad is very similar to the one beneath it. Of course, there are important differences. I also did myself a favor by having the focus of this character essentially be straightforward. That enables me to take one of those shoulder pads and copy and paste it and flip it horizontally. So I can bring it over to the other shoulder. Yes, you have to tweak it beyond that, but it helps me make use of a lot of the work that I've already done. And I don't know if that's cheating, but when you have a time element, which I do just because of all the other things that I'm doing, it is very, very useful. But again, you can't just copy and paste. You have to adjust, and there are definitely things that you end up redrawing, and you may end up redrawing every single line, but you will have benefited from knowing where to put it and having a lot of the building up work taken care of and just moving on from there. I haven't done a lot of fan art, or as one of my very clever members of this community said, Dan art. I am enjoying the process of taking somebody else's work, seeing all of those amazing design decisions, and honoring them while also putting my own spin on it. I mean, it's going to have your own element to it, even if you try to look a lot like somebody else. There's going to be some of you that seeps through. Here I'm trying to find more of a balance, and I think I've mentioned this before. I'm not fully imitating all of the tenets of anime, but I am definitely keeping it in line with some of that. The elongation of the limbs, the head is not proportioned as you might normally do in Western-style illustration. Certainly I'm going to keep the eyes closer to what the original looks like. I have been playing with putting a little bit more detail around the nose, the nostril area, to make it look a little bit more naturalistic and less just like a simple expression of a line, which I'm not saying is worse or better than. It's completely about, the style. So anyway, I continue to enjoy playing with those elements and turning those dials up or down. You can see here I'm spending a lot of time on the rib cage and the torso, the way that the abdominal muscles are shown. I tried a few different approaches, but I wanted to keep that sense of sensuality, which I think you see really strongly in the image on the card. And so I wanted to make sure that it felt, to a degree, somewhat anatomically correct, but also kind of cool. I'm allowing for some liberty here to make it look more striking. The elongation helps for sure when you have a very narrow waist in contrast to broad shoulders. That tends to create a very striking image. We like that aesthetic. That's definitely part of Kazuki Takahashi's original design, and I'm simply translating that into my terminology. Here we are working on the staff. I know I got that shape not entirely right, so I will have to modify that later. But doing straight lines is actually super easy with this app. You start your line on one point, you draw it to another point. You don't have to have drawn that in a smooth way, and if you just hold it on that secondary point, it will straighten the line for you. So much easier. And I got to make sure to get all those little details in. Now I move into the shading. We're seeing it look more dimensional, more realistic, less 2D. Although I am tempted to do one of these And I could do a recoloring of this in the animation style, the cell-shaded style, as they sometimes call it, where you basically only have 2 colors or maybe 3 colors to denote a gradation from highlights to lowlights and whatever the mid-range might be. And there's very little gradation or smoothing or blending between those colors. It's a hard line, which is a very cool look. Obviously, I'm doing this in more of a naturalistic and quote-unquote painterly approach. I want to make sure, though, that there's a really nice high contrast between those highlights and the lowlights. That's part of what makes this design pop. This is the 5th Yu-Gi-Oh! Character I've done. And I've already done a different version of the Dark Magician. And I always am surprised and inspired by the complexity that goes into these designs. I think it's somewhat surprising because I've seen these images for so long, but I've never really thought, how would I break that down as an illustrator? And that's really, really cool and comprehensive way to appreciate all the choices that were made and how these elements work together and the kinds of details that really matter. And it's been a wonderful learning experience and has definitely only enhanced my respect and appreciation for Sensei Takahashi's work. So, I think I'm most of the way through this image. Just need to touch up some of that fine line work in the trim. It's 3-dimensional, and right now it's just 2-dimensional. I'll have to put some shading on that stuff to really get across what Takahashi had in mind. And this image, again, is going to be part of a larger composition, but I think I may also make this image available separately if people are interested. And I appreciate you tagging along for another By the Hand of Dan. I hope that these draw-along videos are fun. I know some people enjoy them as ASMR, which is great. Enjoy it however you like. And I'll look forward to sharing another image next time.